The December night settled heavily around the mansion, the kind of winter darkness that felt thick enough to silence even the wind. Snow drifted past the tall glass windows in slow, glittering waves, coating the driveway, the garden, and every surface with a soft, icy white glow. Inside, however, the warmth of the house felt deceptive, beautiful on the outside but tense and suffocating within. The lights were dim, the fire crackled quietly, and yet an uneasy silence pressed against the walls as if the whole place sensed something was terribly wrong. She moved slowly through the living room, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting protectively on her round belly. 8 months along, every step felt heavier, but tonight the weight on her heart was far more unbearable. Her husband sat across the room, scrolling through his phone with a frown that deepened every time the screen lit up. He barely looked up when she spoke, barely answered when she asked simple questions about dinner or the baby's room. His irritation felt sharper than the cold outside. But it wasn't just his silence. It was the constant buzz of his phone, messages he tilted away from her eyes, calls he stepped outside to answer, whispers he pretended were work emergencies. Every time the device vibrated, his expression softened in a way it never did for her anymore. She noticed. She felt it. She knew something was slipping, something secret and painful. The warmth of the house didn't reach her, instead, dread curled slowly inside her chest, hinting that the night held more than just snow, it held truth she wasn't ready to face. The doorbell rang sharply, slicing through the tense silence of the house. She turned her head slowly, confused. No one ever visited this late, especially not during a snowstorm. Before she could take a step, her husband was already on his feet, moving faster than she had seen him move in weeks. His sudden urgency made her heart thud with unease. He tried to block her view as he opened the door, but it was too late. A woman stood there, shaking snow off her expensive coat, her confidence radiating like a spotlight. The mistress. The woman from the messages. The face she had feared without ever seeing. The husband's eyes widened in panic, but only for a heartbeat. Then, as if something inside him snapped, he hardened. His expression shifted from worried to cold, from guilty to strangely fearless. He stepped aside and let the mistress in without hesitation, without shame, without even glancing at his pregnant wife standing a few steps behind. The sting of betrayal hit her chest like icy wind. The mistress walked in with her chin held high, her heels clicking boldly on the marble floor, her eyes sweeping the room as if she already owned it. She didn't say hello. She didn't pretend. She smirked at the wife's swollen belly, then brushed past her as though she were nothing more than furniture. Tension spread through the house instantly, sharp, suffocating, electric. The wife stood frozen, her breath shaking, while the mistress moved comfortably, deliberately marking her territory. She placed her purse on the couch, loosened her coat, and smiled smugly at the husband, who didn't defend his wife, didn't speak for her, didn't even acknowledge her pain. In that moment, she realized the truth. The betrayal she feared had already walked through the door, and her husband had opened it willingly. The argument began small, just a trembling question from her, a simple, desperate "why is she here?" But her husband reacted as if she had accused him of a crime. His voice rose, sharp and explosive, echoing through the hallway. The mistress stood behind him with folded arms, watching like someone enjoying a show designed for her entertainment. Every word he hurled at his pregnant wife cut deeper than the last, fueled not by truth but by guilt and anger he didn't want to face. When she tried to step closer, pleading for him to calm down, he snapped. His rage twisted into something cold and merciless. He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to injure the baby, but rough enough to make her gasp, and dragged her toward the front door. She begged him to stop, begged him to think, her tears mixing with the fear tightening in her chest. But he wasn't listening. He wasn't even seeing her. The moment the door swung open, the blizzard roared in, icy wind cutting through her thin clothes like knives. Snowflakes slapped her face, instantly soaking her slippers. She shook her head, terrified, clutching her belly. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm freezing, please don't do this." But he didn't soften. He didn't hesitate. With a final shove, he forced her out onto the porch. Before she could steady herself, the door slammed shut with a violent thud that echoed through her bones. The last thing she saw inside was the mistress's satisfied smirk, the triumphant smile of someone who had finally eliminated the problem. The cold hit her all at once. Her breath stung, her fingers numbed instantly, and her legs wobbled under the weight of her swollen belly. Snow piled against her feet as she tried to move, but each step felt impossible. Tears froze on her cheeks as she wrapped her arms around herself, realizing the horrifying truth: she had been abandoned, helpless, and carrying a life that depended entirely on her strength. Her heart shattered in the storm long before her body began to collapse under its merciless weight. The wind howled against her ears as she staggered toward the door, praying he might open it if he heard her. She lifted her trembling hand and knocked, each weak tap swallowed instantly by the raging storm. She tried again, harder, but her strength was fading fast. The icy gusts pushed against her swollen belly, making it nearly impossible to stay upright. Her phone was inside. Her coat was inside. Every lifeline she had depended on, the man she trusted, the home she built, was now behind the door that wouldn't open. She tried calling out, but her voice cracked in the cold, disappearing into the whirl of snow. Her body felt heavier with every breath she took, each inhale burning her lungs like frost. The world around her blurred into white shadows, the lights from distant houses flickering like fading stars. She turned toward the driveway, attempting to reach the gate, thinking maybe a passing car or neighbor could help. But her legs buckled beneath her, the icy ground biting into her knees as she fell. She cradled her belly with both hands, fear gripping her chest harder than the cold ever could. "Please, not my baby," she whispered, barely hearing her own voice. Her vision swirled, shapes dissolving, darkness creeping in from the edges. She tried to lift herself, but her arms trembled violently, refusing to obey. Snow gathered on her hair, her lashes, her clothes. Her body slumped sideways, sinking into the freezing whiteness. As consciousness slipped away, her last thought was a desperate prayer that someone, anyone, would find her before it was too late. From the warmth and safety of his private study, the billionaire sat reviewing documents, the fire crackling softly behind him. He was a man of habits, quiet, methodical, and painfully aware of the fragility of life ever since the loss of his late wife. His mansion, secluded and fortified, gave him privacy, but it also offered a clear view of the neighboring homes through strategically placed cameras. It was late, the snow falling in thick, blinding sheets, and most of the world had retreated indoors. Yet his sharp eyes, trained to notice the smallest irregularity, caught something that immediately drew his attention. Through one of the outdoor monitors, he saw a figure staggering near the Hart residence. At first, he thought it was a passerby caught in the storm, but then the posture, the hand clutching the midsection, the swaying steps in the snow, made him freeze. Recognition hit him like a jolt. It was her, the pregnant neighbor who had often waved politely during rare encounters, always gentle, always reserved. Tonight, something was wrong. Very wrong. He rose immediately, shedding his usual calm, donning a thick coat over his tailored suit, and stepped into the storm. Each step outside was met with biting cold, snow whipping against his face and hands, but he pushed forward without hesitation. Nothing mattered except getting to her. His heart pounded not just from concern, but from a deeply rooted instinct to protect the vulnerable, a trait sharpened by the loss he had endured years ago. As he approached, he could see her swaying dangerously, snow collecting on her hair, her face pale and frozen. The sight ignited urgency in him. He moved faster, determined that she would not succumb to the storm tonight. Nothing, not the wind, not the snow, not the deadly chill, would stop him from reaching her in time. He reached her just as her knees buckled one final time, catching her gently before she hit the icy ground. Her body was trembling violently, lips blue, and her breathing shallow, barely enough to sustain life. Panic gripped him, but he forced himself to stay calm, to act. He knelt beside her, quickly draping his thick coat over her shivering shoulders, the warmth of it only slightly countering the icy fingers of the blizzard. He cradled her carefully, checking her pulse and listening for any sound of her struggling heartbeat. It was weak, but it was there. His hands trembled despite his efforts to remain steady, and for a moment, his mind flashed back to that night he would never forget. The night he had failed to save his late wife, the cold hospital room, the sound of machines flatlining, the unbearable guilt that had haunted him ever since. The memory fueled his determination now. He refused to let history repeat itself. He had a second chance to save a life, a mother and her unborn child. Failure was not an option. Pulling out his phone with one gloved hand, he dialed 911, his voice steady but urgent, describing the situation, the woman's condition, and the blizzard that threatened to swallow them whole. He gave the operators precise instructions, following their guidance while shielding her with his body from the relentless wind and snow. Minutes felt like hours as he waited, gently rubbing her arms to keep circulation flowing, murmuring words of reassurance he didn't fully believe could reach her. Then, through the blizzard's roar, distant sirens pierced the night, echoing across the snow-covered streets. Relief surged through him, though he stayed focused, knowing that every second counted. The ambulance was coming, and he would not let her slip away, not tonight. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and urgency, a sharp contrast to the blizzard's biting cold outside. Nurses rushed past him, dragging stretchers and shouting instructions, while doctors worked over his neighbor, who was now lying on a gurney, her face pale, her body trembling despite the heated blankets wrapped around her. Monitors beeped rapidly, displaying unstable readings that made his chest tighten. Every second was critical, not just for her, but for the life she carried within her. He followed closely, answering questions the medical team threw at him with precise clarity. She was exposed to freezing temperatures for an extended period, 8 months pregnant, he said, his voice calm but firm. The staff nodded, working with urgent coordination. One doctor asked for the emergency contact, but the husband was unreachable, his phone ignored, and no one could locate him. Without hesitation, the billionaire signed the forms, giving permission for all necessary procedures, his name becoming the lifeline for both mother and child. As the medical team wheeled her into the operating area for further stabilization, he remained close, watching anxiously as her pale hand twitched slightly. He held on to hope like a lifeline, whispering words of encouragement he didn't expect to hear himself say. "You're safe now. We'll get through this. Just hold on." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. He refused to leave her side, observing every movement, every reaction, and noticing the small, involuntary gestures that revealed her strength even in weakness. In that quiet, tense space between life and death urgency, something shifted. He felt an inexplicable bond forming, a protective instinct deeper than mere concern. His heart ached not only for the danger she had endured but for the life he was witnessing unfold before him, fragile and precious. By the time the doctor finally emerged, giving a slight nod of reassurance, he exhaled deeply, gripping her hand gently, silently vowing that no harm would come to her again. In those sterile, hectic hospital corridors, an unspoken connection had taken root, born out of desperation, fear, and unwavering determination. The sharp knock at the mansion's door reverberated through the lavish hall, startling both the husband and the mistress. He frowned, masking his growing panic with a stiff posture, as he walked to the door. Outside, 2 uniformed police officers stood in the snow, their expressions serious, professional, and unwavering. "Sir," one of them began, "we have reports of a pregnant woman left outside in dangerous weather. We need to speak with you immediately." His heart skipped. He tried to compose himself, but the familiar surge of fear crept in, the kind that comes only when someone realizes their actions have crossed a line they cannot undo. The mistress, noticing the officer's intent gaze, quickly interjected. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said, her voice syrupy, dripping with false innocence. She attempted to fabricate a story, twisting the truth to make herself seem harmless, but arrogance betrayed her. Her smirk faltered under the weight of authority, and small inconsistencies in her explanation only heightened suspicion. The husband's panic surged as he watched their judgmental expressions. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he understood how serious the situation was. He wasn't just in trouble with the law, he had jeopardized lives, his pregnant wife's, the baby's, and even his own reputation irreparably. The realization hit him like a freezing gust through an open window. He had fallen far, and there was no easy way back. He stumbled over words, unable to explain, unable to justify, and the severity of his actions began to sink in as the officers started taking notes, asking pointed questions, and documenting the incident meticulously. At the hospital, the air was thick with antiseptic and quiet urgency. She woke slowly, blinking against the harsh white lights, her body aching and trembling. Panic surged as she realized she was alive but unsure of her surroundings. Her eyes darted around, landing on the billionaire who had been at her side the entire time. His presence, calm yet vigilant, offered a strange sense of security. Gently, he brushed a lock of hair from her damp forehead, murmuring softly, "You're safe now. Everything's okay. I've got you, and the baby." Tears welled up as she tried to process the night's horrors, the betrayal, the storm, the freezing cold, but hearing his steady words anchored her. Outside, authorities had begun their work. Police officers and social workers arrived, piecing together the events of the blizzard night. They approached the husband with evidence in hand, asking questions about why he had abandoned his pregnant wife. His attempts to explain stumbled under their relentless scrutiny, and the neighbors came forward, offering security footage and first-hand testimony. As the truth unfolded layer by layer, the husband's arrogance crumbled. Every lie he had told, every evasive glance, every justification for cruelty was exposed. The community, the authorities, and even the witnesses confirmed what had happened, leaving him facing not just legal consequences but the harsh moral judgment of those around him. Meanwhile, the billionaire remained at her side, silent yet unwavering, a protective presence ensuring she could begin to heal, reassured that justice would follow and that she and her child were finally out of immediate danger. She stood in the hospital corridor, her body still weak but her spirit far stronger than it had been in weeks. When he entered, she no longer felt fear or helplessness. The terror that had gripped her when he abandoned her had been replaced with a sharp, clear resolve. Her voice was calm, measured, yet every word carried the weight of all she had endured. "Do you understand what you've done?" she asked, her eyes locking onto his, unwavering. "You put my life at risk. You put our baby at risk. Do you even realize the consequences of your actions?" He stammered, attempting to speak, but his excuses felt hollow even to him. He saw the strength in her, the fire that refused to be extinguished by his cruelty, and for the first time, he realized that the woman he had taken for granted could never be controlled again. From across the room, the billionaire observed quietly, maintaining a protective distance yet ready to intervene if needed. His presence was a silent reminder of support, of safety, and of the fact that she no longer stood alone. He could see her courage, the clarity in her words, and the determination that shone in her eyes. She didn't need rescuing in that moment, she needed acknowledgement that she would not tolerate betrayal or harm. After the confrontation, she found herself sitting quietly, exhausted yet relieved. The billionaire approached gently, his demeanor calm, respectful, and unassuming. "You don't have to go back," he said softly, his voice steady. "I can offer you a safe place to stay until you recover, and you won't have to worry about anyone harming you or your baby." She looked at him, surprised by the simplicity and sincerity of the offer. There was no pressure, no expectation, only concern and respect. He maintained boundaries, allowing her to make her own choices, demonstrating patience and dignity in every gesture. Over the following hours, as she settled into a warm room under his care, small moments of trust began to form. A gentle cup of tea, a soft blanket draped over her shoulders, his steady presence nearby, all of it created a subtle, emotional warmth. It wasn't love forced or demanded, it was a quiet connection built on empathy, protection, and the understanding that she was finally safe. She began to relax for the first time in weeks, realizing that this unexpected stranger might just become her anchor in a world that had turned against her. Weeks later, the harsh winter that had once been a threat now felt soft and gentle, snow falling lightly outside as if the world itself had softened in reprieve. Inside the warmly lit living room, the air smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon, the soft glow of Christmas lights reflecting off the ornaments on the tree. She sat in a comfortable chair, cradling her newborn in her arms, the tiny life a fragile symbol of hope, survival, and new beginnings. The baby's soft coos filled the room, a melody that erased the memories of the blizzard, the cold, and the betrayal she had endured. The billionaire stood nearby, his presence calm and protective. There was no rush, no expectation, no forced romance, just the quiet understanding that he had been there when she needed him most, and that he would continue to be. Occasionally, he adjusted the blanket around the baby or handed her a cup of warm tea, small gestures that carried profound reassurance. She glanced up at him and felt a wave of gratitude she could hardly put into words. The world had been harsh, and storms had threatened to destroy everything she loved. Yet in that quiet, golden-lit room, she realized that not all storms left ruin. Some, like the one that had brought him to her side, had guided her to safety, to protection, and to a new family forged not by blood, but by care and loyalty. As the snow fell silently outside, she held her child closer, feeling the warmth of the room, the comfort of the billionaire's presence, and the profound truth that sometimes the end of one storm is just the beginning of a life full of hope, healing, and quiet joy.